The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me, flattening the air in the house I'd once shared with her. Every breath felt thin, an inadequate attempt to fill the cavernous space she'd left behind. Her scent, a ghost of lavender and old paper, still clung to the scarf draped over the armchair, a cruel, persistent whisper. I hadn't touched it in weeks. To do so felt like an act of vandalism against a sacred artifact, or perhaps a surrender to a grief that threatened to dissolve me entirely. I remembered the last time I'd seen her truly laugh, a bright, unburdened sound that had filled every corner of our home. It was before the diagnosis, before the decline, before the quiet. Now the quiet was absolute. It hummed in the walls, echoed in the hollow clink of my morning coffee cup, amplified the frantic thrum of my own pulse. I couldn't stay. The scent of her perfume was a torment, the memory of her laughter a knife. Then came the solicitor's letter, crisp and impersonal, slicing through the shroud of my inertia. My grandmother, whom I hadn't seen or spoken to in 2 decades, had passed, and inexplicably he had left me everything. Her estate, her remote, decaying Victorian manor. It was an escape, a desperate lifeline thrown from the past, a chance to outrun the echoes that haunted my familiar rooms. The drive was long, a blur of gray highway giving way to narrower, winding roads choked by ancient oaks. The sky mirrored my mood, a bruised purple bruised with the promise of rain. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Civilization peeled away like old paint, leaving behind only the encroaching forest, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching across the road. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, gripped tight. This was it. A fresh start or a deeper burial. I wasn't sure which I hoped for. It was a beast of a house, all turrets and gables, its slate roof gleaming dully in the fading light. Paint peeled in strips from its clapboard siding, revealing the gray wood beneath like ancient bone. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, clawed its way up the stone foundation, wrestling with dying rose bushes that had long ago given up their fight for beauty. The iron gate, rusted and half off its hinges, groaned a mournful welcome as I pushed it open. The gravel drive crunched under my tires, a sound that seemed shockingly loud in the profound stillness. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through grimy, leaded glass windows. The air inside was thick and stale, laden with the scent of mildew, mothballs, and something undefinable, something old and forgotten. Each step I took sent a groan through the floorboards, a ripple through the stagnant air. I wandered aimlessly through the downstairs, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. I ran a hand over a mahogany table, leaving a clean streak in the thick layer of dust. Everything here was a relic, a testament to a life lived in isolation, a life I knew nothing about. Outside, the last vestiges of twilight bled into a starless night. I found myself drawn to the overgrown gardens at the rear of the property, a tangle of thorny bushes and weeds that obscured any semblance of a path. The metallic tang in the air was stronger here, almost coppery. As I pushed through a particularly dense thicket of brambles, my boot caught on something solid, something unyielding beneath the tangled roots. I stumbled, scraping my hand on a thorny branch. Brushing away the dirt and dead leaves, I saw it. It was a metal hatch, heavy and rusted, with a single, massive padlock clinging to it like a barnacle. The metal was thick, scarred with time and corrosion. It was unmistakably a door bolted to the ground. Why would my grandmother have this? Who would need something so secure, so hidden here in the middle of nowhere? This was a fallout bunker discovered in backyard. The padlock, ancient and fused with rust, felt impossibly heavy in my grip. I tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. My breath hitched, a faint metallic scent rising from the hatch. What secrets did this strange, buried entrance conceal here at the heart of my grandmother's forgotten world? And what reason could she have had to keep it locked away, hidden beneath the very ground I now stood upon? I pushed away from the armchair, the soft wool of her scarf still warm where my fingers had rested, a cruel echo of a touch I'd never feel again. The silence of the house pressed in, thick and unyielding, a shroud woven from memory and dust. Every breath felt thin, inadequate, failing to fill the cavernous space she'd left behind. Grief was a lead weight in my gut, but beneath it, a flicker of something else stirred a stubborn refusal to drown. I had to move. I had to do something. My grandmother's manor stretched around me, a labyrinth of forgotten lives. I started in the parlor, a room I barely remembered even from childhood visits. Sunlight, filtered through grimy panes, illuminated motes dancing in the stale air. Velour drapes, stiff with age, hung like forgotten sentinels. Every surface was cloaked in a fine, granular film, the scent of dust and decay thick in my nostrils. I ran a hand over a mahogany side table, leaving a clean streak on its dark surface. A grandfather clock in the corner stood silent, its pendulum still, frozen in a moment decades past. I wandered deeper into a study overflowing with books. Shelves bowed under the weight of leather-bound volumes, their titles obscured by dust. I shivered, pulling my sweater tighter. Old houses, I told myself. Drafts, settling foundations. Localized as if a window had been flung open in only that specific pocket of air. I moved on, dismissing it as a quirk of the old structure, a trick of the sunlight. On a cluttered desk beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers, I found a heavy photo album. Its cover, once a rich crimson, was now faded to a bruised purple. I opened it carefully, the brittle pages crackling. Black and white faces stared back at me, frozen smiles and solemn gazes from another era. My grandmother, younger, her stern features softened by a hint of a smile, stood beside a tall, gaunt man I didn't recognize. Further in, a group portrait. One face in the back row had been violently scratched out, a jagged tear through the paper where the eyes should have been. Vandalism, I thought, a family quarrel perhaps. An old story I wasn't privy to. I continued my exploration, room after room. The kitchen, with its cast-iron stove and scullery, smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, like old pennies. As I passed through the hall, a single bare bulb hanging overhead flickered once, twice, then settled back into a weak, steady glow. The wiring, I decided. Old houses. The same rationalization, but this time a tiny knot of unease tightened in my chest. It was just the house. It was just the grief. Upstairs, the bedrooms were similarly untouched, layers of dust blanketing ornate furniture and moth-eaten rugs. One room, however, felt different. It was smaller, tucked away at the end of a narrow corridor, almost an afterthought. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of dried flowers and something else, something subtly acrid like burnt sugar. My breath caught in my throat. I stood still, listening. It was indistinct, a murmur without words, too soft to be wind, too close to be my imagination. My temples throbbed. I closed my eyes, shaking my head, the stress, the isolation. I was hearing things. I opened my eyes, scanning the room. In a recessed alcove, half hidden by a tattered tapestry, sat a chest. It looked ancient, heavy with secrets. What could be inside? Who had left it here, hidden away? The afternoon light began to fade, painting the dust motes in the air with streaks of orange. I felt a sudden, urgent need for fresh air, for something beyond these suffocating walls. I went outside, the cool autumn breeze a welcome shock against my skin. The garden was overgrown, a tangled wilderness of thorny bushes and dying perennials. As I pushed through a particularly dense thicket of ivy near the back of the property, my foot caught on something hard. I stumbled, nearly falling, and looked down. There, almost completely obscured by the rampant growth, was a heavy, rusted metal hatch, bolted shut with thick, corroded clamps. The edges were sealed with what looked like crumbling concrete. A small, faded plaque, almost illegible, bore a single, stark inscription: Fallout Shelter. No, not shelter, fallout bunker, discovered in backyard. My grandmother had a fallout bunker. Why? What had she been preparing for? And why had she never mentioned it? My hand hovered over the cold metal, a shiver running through me that had nothing to do with the evening chill. What other secrets did this property hold, buried beneath the dust and the tangled vines? Every breath felt thin, inadequate, failing to fill the cavernous space. I stood there suspended, the scent of lavender and something acrid old wood, damp earth clinging to the air, making my head swim. My own skin felt alien, stretched tight over bones that ached with a fatigue no amount of sleep could cure. A faint whisper brushed past my ear. "William." My head snapped around. The sound was so distinct, so familiar, yet utterly impossible. Just the house settling, I told myself, the old timbers groaning under the weight of years. My grief was playing tricks, turning creaks into conversations. I walked to the nearest window, pushing aside the heavy velvet curtain. The afternoon light, weak and watery, painted stripes across the dusty floorboards. Outside, the overgrown garden looked like a forgotten wilderness, trees clawing at a sky the color of bruised plums. The isolation was absolute. No traffic hum, no distant dog bark, nothing but the wind rustling through unseen leaves. I turned from the window, my gaze sweeping across the drawing room. The antique furniture stood like silent sentinels, shrouded in dust sheets. And then I saw it. A glint of gold on the polished surface of the grand piano. A single, delicate hairpin, the kind she used to wear, catching the fading light. My breath hitched. It wasn't there a moment ago. It couldn't have been. I dusted this room meticulously just yesterday, trying to impose some order on the chaos. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The metal felt cool, smooth, undeniably real. It was hers. I knew it, but how? My mind scrambled for explanations. Perhaps it had been tucked away, caught in the folds of the piano cover, and dislodged when I moved something. A logical, sane explanation, but my hands were shaking. I clutched the hairpin, the small, sharp points digging into my palm. Later, as twilight bled across the sky, painting the windows in hues of gray and purple, I found myself in the kitchen trying to force down a meal I had no appetite for. The cheap radio I'd brought with me crackled, a local news broadcast barely audible over the static. I chewed slowly, the food tasting like ash. Then the static intensified, overwhelming the broadcast. A new sound emerged, faint at first, then growing clearer, cutting through the white noise. It was a melody, a lullaby. The one she used to hum softly when she couldn't sleep. The one she sang to herself sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening. My fork clattered against the plate. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The melody swelled, impossibly rich, as if coming from directly behind me. I spun around, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Nothing. Just the empty kitchen, the flickering fluorescent light, the radio still spitting static. My eyes darted around, searching. The melody faded, replaced by the relentless hiss of the radio. My hands were clammy. This wasn't grief. This wasn't my imagination. This was something else. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. I fumbled for my phone, my thumb shaking as I scrolled through contacts. "The colleague," I muttered, hitting the call button. "I all right, mate?" His voice was gruff, laced with a weary impatience. No, I'm not," I said, my voice thin, reedy. "Things are happening here, things I can't explain." "Still at the old place, look," I told, "a change of scenery, that's what I need. Get out of there." Isolating myself, William, it's not healthy. Grief does funny things to the mind." "It's not grief," I insisted, my voice rising. I saw her hairpin. I heard her humming. The lullaby, the one he always. "William," he cut in, his tone firm, a note of warning in it. "I under a lot of stress, completely understandable, but I need to take care of myself. Maybe get some rest, come back to the city for a few days, clear my head." He wasn't listening. He thought I was breaking. He thought I was losing my mind. He was right about one thing: I needed to clear my head, or maybe I needed answers. I couldn't stay in the house, trapped with these phantom echoes. My gaze drifted towards the back window, towards the overgrown expanse of the backyard. My grandmother had always been secretive about that section of the property. "Leave it be, William," he'd said once, his voice unusually sharp. "Nothing but weeds and trouble back there." A sudden, inexplicable pull drew me outside. The air was crisp, carrying the damp scent of decaying leaves. I walked through the knee-high grass, pushing aside thorny bushes and brittle branches. I kept walking, driven by an urgency I couldn't name, past a stand of ancient oaks, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Partially obscured by a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons, a concrete slab. It was almost perfectly flush with the earth, covered in moss and dirt, but its geometric shape was unmistakable against the organic sprawl of the garden. A heavy, rusted metal hatch was set into its center, almost swallowed by the relentless march of nature. This wasn't some forgotten root cellar. This was too robust, too deliberately constructed. It was secured with a thick, corroded padlock. I tried to pull it to budge it, but it was solid, unmoving. The rust on the padlock looked ancient, caked on in layers. I returned to the shed, found a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters, their handles stiff with disuse. The snip was surprisingly loud in the quiet twilight, a sharp, metallic scream that grated on my nerves. With the padlock gone, the hatch still resisted, sealed by years of grime and earth. I braced my feet, gritted my teeth, and heaved. A blast of stale, earthy air, thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic, hit me. Below, a set of concrete steps vanished into absolute blackness. This was no ordinary storage space. I descended carefully, each step echoing unnaturally in the confined space. My breath plumed in front of me. At the bottom, a single bare bulb hung from a frayed wire, its glass opaque with grime. I flicked the switch on the wall. The bulb sputtered, then cast a weak yellow glow over the small, circular room. The bunker was sparse. A cot, a rusted metal desk, a few shelves, and on the desk, lying open, was a leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, yellowed, filled with looping, spidery script. My grandmother's handwriting. But it wasn't the journal that stole my breath. Tucked between the pages, carefully pressed and dried, was a single, perfect white orchid. The same type of orchid I had placed on her grave just weeks ago. The same type she always bought for my wife. My hand trembled as I reached for it. How could it be here? How could it be so perfectly preserved? My grandmother had been dead for months before I arrived. And this flower, it looked fresh. My fingers brushed the petals. They felt like silk. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was impossible. This was a deliberate act, but by whom and why? Was this her way of communicating? Or was it something far more sinister, a cruel mockery playing on my deepest wounds? I kept walking, driven by a raw, unyielding current that hummed beneath my skin. The air grew colder, the wind's chorus swelling into something almost melodic, yet utterly dissonant. My boots crunched over brittle leaves and snapped twigs, each step carrying me deeper into the untamed woods at the very edge of the property. Thorny brambles snagged at my trousers, but I barely registered them. My gaze was fixed ahead, drawn by an invisible thread. Then the ground beneath my feet shifted. Not a gentle slope, but a sudden, abrupt drop, hidden beneath a thick blanket of overgrown ivy and tangled weeds. I stumbled, catching myself on the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak, my fingers digging into its rough bark. Before me, partially obscured by the relentless creep of nature, was a rusted metal hatch, its edges gnawed by time and corrosion. A narrow, concrete lip framed it, barely visible beneath the moss. This was it. This was what had called me, a fallout bunker discovered in backyard. My breath hitched. The air around the hatch felt heavier, colder, as if it exhaled the decades of sealed darkness it contained. I knelt, pushing aside the stubborn ivy that clung to the hatch like a protective shroud. The metal was pitted, rough beneath my fingertips, but the latch, surprisingly, wasn't rusted shut. It groaned in protest as I forced it upwards, a sound like a dying animal. The hatch lifted with a reluctant sigh, revealing a gaping maw of blackness. A wave of frigid, stagnant air rushed out, carrying with it the choking scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood or forgotten machinery. My flashlight beam, weak and wavering, cut a hesitant path down a series of rough-hewn concrete steps. Cobwebs, thick and heavy, hung like tattered curtains, shimmering with the dust of ages. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to seal this thing up and pretend I'd never found it. But the pull was still there, stronger now, a whisper in my mind. Go down. I descended slowly, one hand braced against the slimy concrete wall, the other holding the trembling flashlight. My breath plumed in front of me, misting the beam. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water somewhere deeper within and the frantic beat of my own heart, echoing in the confined space. The steps ended abruptly on a dirt floor, packed hard by time. The bunker was a single, claustrophobic chamber, roughly 15 feet square. Low ceiling, damp concrete walls, and a pervasive sense of abandonment. Empty shelves lined one wall, dust-laden and stripped bare. A rusted cot, its mattress long since rotted away, stood in a corner. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. I swept the beam across the room, noting the patches of black mold blooming on the ceiling, the spiders that scuttled into cracks. It was a tomb, undisturbed for decades. My gaze snagged on a small, wooden desk pushed against the far wall, mostly hidden by what looked like an old, mildewed tarp. The tarp felt coarse and brittle as I pulled it away, revealing a simple, sturdy desk, its surface scarred by rings and scratches. On top, amidst a scattering of ancient mummified insects, lay a small, leather-bound book. It was blackened with age, its cover warped, but the faint impression of an ornate E was still visible. My grandmother's initial. I picked it up, the leather stiff and dry, threatening to crack. The pages inside were brittle, yellowed, and filled with a frantic, spidery handwriting that I recognized as hers. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. More like scattered thoughts, desperate notes. I flipped through the first few pages, the fine dust rising to tickle my nose. August 14th. The entry was short, jagged. They won't leave me alone. I turned another page carefully, fearing it would crumble in my hands. September 3rd. It demands, always demands, waiting. My fingers tightened around the book. My grandmother was a recluse. Yes, but not paranoid. They was she. October 1st. The pact, my mother, her mother, it binds us, a terrible inheritance. I tried to break it, foolish. It only made them stronger. The pact, a pact with what? What inheritance? My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of my quiet, eccentric grandmother with these terrifying, cryptic entries. This wasn't just a house. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something deeper, something rooted, something familial. I continued to read, my eyes scanning the frantic scrawl, searching for answers, for clarity. November 12th. William, my grandson, he must never know, never come here. It will find him, it will claim him. My own name. The word stood out, stark and terrifying, a warning, a prophecy. My grandmother knew. She knew something was coming for me. A faint scratching sound echoed from deeper within the bunker, a soft, insistent scrape that made the hairs on my arm stand on end. I froze, the journal clutched tight. It sounded like something dragging itself across the dirt floor just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. What was that sound? And what did my grandmother mean by the pact? The faint scratching sound, a soft, insistent scrape, pulled my attention from the scrawled name. My own name, William. It vibrated in the oppressive quiet of the fallout bunker, discovered in my backyard, a tiny disruption in the suffocating stillness. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my chest. The air here was thick, tasting of damp earth and something metallic like old blood. The scratching came from deeper within, beyond the immediate circle of light, a rhythmic rasp against concrete like fingernails dragging across stone. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to override the frantic pulse in my ears, enough to draw me forward despite the primal urge to bolt. Curiosity, or perhaps a morbid fascination, was a cruel master. Each step I took echoed, the sound swallowed quickly by the heavy air. My boots crunched on loose gravel and dust. The walls, slick with condensation, pressed in. I could smell mildew and something else, something cloying and sweet like decaying flowers. The scratching grew clearer, more defined. It wasn't random, it had a cadence, a deliberate, slow rhythm, scritch, scritch. The beam of my lantern wavered, my hand trembling. My throat felt dry, constricted. When I rounded the corner, the sound stopped, abruptly. My eyes strained into the gloom, nothing, just more damp concrete, a pile of rusted tools, a forgotten, cobweb-draped shelf. I swept the light back and forth, my gaze darting, searching for a source, a rat, a loose pipe. Anything. Not in my ears, not a sound I heard with my auditory canals, but a presence, a breath of frigid air that brushed my cheek. It carried a scent too, lilacs. My wife's favorite. It was impossible. He was gone, a shimmer. At first I thought it was just my vision playing tricks in the low light, a trick of the moisture on the wall. It began to coalesce, a vague outline, translucent at first, then gaining density. My breath caught. My legs locked. I couldn't move. My skin prickled with 1,000 tiny needles, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. It was her, or a mockery of her. The figure solidified, taking on the familiar curve of her shoulder, the gentle slope of her neck. Her hair, the same rich auburn, cascaded around her face. But her face, it was wrong. Her mouth was stretched into a travesty of a smile, too wide, too thin, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. It wasn't her voice, not truly. It was a cruel imitation, a distorted echo that grated against my memories, twisting them into something vile. It took a step towards me, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. The smell of lilacs intensified, cloying and sickly sweet, overwhelming the damp earth. My stomach churned, its head tilted, a grotesque parody of her endearing habit. Our last argument, the rain, the way I slammed the door. A spike of ice pierced my heart. That memory. It was one I buried, one I fought to forget, a bitter, insignificant fight before. How could it know? How could it know? Its hand rose, long, skeletal fingers reaching out. It was a gesture I knew, a comforting touch she often offered, but this was not comfort. The skin was too pale, almost phosphorescent, and beneath it I could almost discern the faint tracery of bone. It was not her hand, my fault. That was the core of my grief, the gnawing guilt. It knew. It was twisting the knife. This wasn't a ghost. This was something else, something far more sinister, something that fed on my deepest wound. I stumbled backward, the lantern swinging wildly, its beam flashing across the monstrous imitation of my wife. Its smile widened, stretching further, impossibly, until it seemed to split its face. A strangled cry tore from my throat. I turned, not caring where I was going, just needing to be away. My feet scrabbled on the gravel, my lungs burning. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran blindly towards the distant rectangle of light that marked the bunker's entrance, the sound of its distorted. The cool air a shock against my burning face. My chest heaved. My hands trembled violently, the lantern clattering to the ground. It had seen me. It had known me. It had worn her face. It had spoken my deepest fear. Was it truly gone, or had I only escaped its grasp for a moment? The cool, damp grass pressed against my cheek, a stark contrast to the burning phantom touch that still prickled my skin. My lungs ached, pulling in great ragged gulps of the late afternoon air. The lantern, fallen beside me, cast a feeble glow on the dew-kissed blades, its light too weak to push back the encroaching shadows of the surrounding woods. Behind me, the concrete maw of the fallout bunker, discovered in my backyard, seemed to pulse with a malevolent silence. It had known me, yes. It had called to me. And I had answered. My hand still trembled, a persistent tremor that vibrated through my bones. I pushed myself up, my muscles stiff, every joint protesting. Retreat was no longer an option. This house, this land, this thing, it had chosen me. I had to understand. I had to fight. I stumbled back towards the manor, the grand, decaying edifice now seeming less a refuge and more a cage. The setting sun bled across the sky, painting the clouds in bruised purples and oranges, a fitting backdrop for the turmoil churning within me. The front door groaned shut behind me, plunging the foyer into a premature twilight. The air inside was heavy, still, tasting of dust and decay, and something else, something metallic like old blood or rust. My feet carried me, almost of their own accord, to the grand library. Shelves upon shelves of ancient tomes lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded, their pages yellowed with age. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the heavy velvet curtains. I ran a hand over a leather-bound volume, the dry, brittle material flaking beneath my touch. This was where the secrets were. This was where I would find them. I started methodically, pulling down thick, leather-bound ledgers that looked like family records. The script was an elegant, looping hand, difficult to decipher in the dim light. Hours blurred. My fingers grew grimy with dust, my eyes strained, scanning names, dates, cryptic notes. The early entries were mostly mundane births, deaths, property deeds. But as I delved deeper, moving through generations, a pattern began to emerge, subtle at first, then increasingly stark. Certain names would appear, then vanish abruptly without explanation. A woman named Alara, noted as prone to melancholia, then simply departed. A man, Thomas, described as having a wandering mind. His last entry a frantic, half-formed sentence about the quiet that takes. No death dates, no burial plots, just gone. I found an old, brittle newspaper clipping tucked between the pages of a family Bible. The headline, yellowed and fragile, spoke of a local eccentric, a recluse who lived deep in the woods, found wandering aimlessly. The ramblings of a fearful community, but reading it now, my skin prickled. My search led me to a collection of handwritten journals bound in rough canvas. One, in particular, caught my eye. Its cover was blank, but the pages within were filled with a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. The author, an ancestor named Martha, detailed a growing unease, a sense of being watched. It wasn't just my wife's death or my grief that had drawn me here. This was generations. The disappearances, the madness, they weren't random, they were connected. The local legends weren't just old wives' tales, they were warnings. I looked up from the journal, my eyes sweeping over the vast, silent library. The house groaned, a settling sound or something more. I felt a faint, distant hum, a vibration in the very air, so subtle it could have been my imagination or the frantic beating of my own heart. The chorale, it wasn't just a legend, it was real and it was here. What had Martha meant by ancient heart of the woods? What did it want from me? Martha's final word, empty, echoed in my head, a hollow bell tolling the end of a long, dark lineage. The journal lay open on the library table, its pages brittle, its secrets now mine to bear. I pushed away from the heavy oak, a metallic tang on my tongue. It wasn't just the chill of the house that had seeped into my bones. The disappearances, the madness. I was part of it now. The air shifted. It wasn't a draft. It was a pressure, a sudden, almost imperceptible density that pressed against my eardrums. The library, which moments ago had felt like a refuge, now seemed to shrink around me. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows, not like playful sprites, but like a million tiny, watchful eyes. I stood, my knees protesting, and turned towards the door I'd entered through. It was gone. My breath hitched. No latch, no handle, no faint outline where a doorframe should have been. My heart gave a frantic flutter against my ribs. I must have been mistaken. The house was old, labyrinthine. I was tired, grieving. My mind was playing tricks. I spun around, searching for another exit. There was the grand fireplace, a gaping maw of blackened stone, and two other doors, both leading to hallways I hadn't explored in depth. I chose the one to my left, a heavy, unadorned slab of wood. It opened with a groan that seemed to resonate deep within the house's foundations. Beyond it, a narrow corridor stretched into gloom, longer than I remembered it being, much longer. I stepped into the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. The door swung shut behind me with a soft thud, no click of a latch. I tried the knob, locked, my stomach clenched. I rattled it, then pounded on the wood. Nothing. Panic began to bloom, hot and prickly under my skin. This wasn't right. The house was changing. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was a trick of the light, the unfamiliarity. I walked forward, my footsteps heavy on the warped floorboards. The corridor seemed to twist subtly, not in a straight line but veering off course, making me feel as if I was constantly turning without truly moving forward. The light from the library, which should have been visible behind me, was swallowed by an impenetrable gloom. I pressed on, determined to find my way out, to find a window, a working phone line, anything. I passed a faded tapestry depicting a hunting scene, then another, identical one moments later. My brow furrowed. Had I circled back? No, that was impossible. The The corridor had been straight, or had it? A low hum began, a vibration that started in the floorboards and crawled up my legs. It was a sound I hadn't heard before, a deep, resonant thrumming that felt less like a sound and more like a presence. The walls around me seemed to breathe, the wallpaper rippling as if a gust of wind passed behind it, though the air was still and stagnant. It felt like clammy skin. My breath hitched again. I recognized this stretch of hallway. I had walked it yesterday. It led to the kitchen. I pushed open the door at the end, expecting the familiar scent of stale coffee and disinfectant. Instead, I was met with a small, windowless room, its walls lined with shelves of ancient, unlabeled jars. The air was thick with the smell of formaldehyde and something else, something vaguely organic and sickly sweet. This wasn't the kitchen. I had never seen this room before. I backed away, my head swimming. The hallway behind me was no longer a hallway. It was a dead end, a solid wall of brick. The house was playing with me, twisting itself into a cruel maze. I was trapped. A memory flashed, sharp and painful, my wife's last smile, fading, then gone. The entity. It wasn't just physical space it warped. It was my mind, my grief. I could feel it probing, testing the raw edges of my sorrow. I had to get out. I had to find an exit, any exit. I stumbled back towards the brick wall, my hands scrambling for a seam, a latch, anything. It was seamless, solid. I could hear a faint scratching sound now coming from behind the wall. Or was it inside the wall, or inside my head? I closed my eyes, trying to clear the fog. When I opened them, the small, windowless room was gone. I was standing in a different corridor entirely, one I dimly recognized as being on the second floor. How had I moved? How much time had passed? The light outside the tall, arched window at the end of the hall was a deep twilight, though it had been late afternoon just moments ago. The house was not just a house. It was a predator. It was isolating me, cutting me off. I needed to get outside, to the open air, to the backyard where I could breathe, where I knew there was a way out, a path to the road. I remembered the old maps, the blueprints. There was a secret passage, a hidden door that led from the main house to the grounds. I had to find it. I ran now, a desperate, scrambling sprint through hallways that seemed to stretch and contract, past doors that appeared and vanished. I pounded on heavy oak, on splintered pine, on smooth, cool plaster. Each door was locked, or led to another disorienting corridor, or a room I'd never seen before. I thought of the fallout bunker discovered in backyard. It was a solid structure, a concrete haven. If I could just reach it, I could be safe. I remembered the plans, the way out, the path through the overgrown rose garden. I pushed through a set of double doors that should have led to the main foyer. Instead, I found myself in a vast, echoing chamber, the air thick with the scent of stagnant water and decay. It was a cellar, but not the one I knew. And in the center, a single rusted ladder descended into a pool of black water. My legs felt like lead. My breath rasped. The house was actively preventing my escape, twisting itself around me, a living, breathing trap. The walls seemed to lean inward, the ceilings to press down. I stumbled, catching myself on a damp, moss-covered stone wall. My vision blurred. I looked back, trying to retrace my steps, but the double doors I'd entered through were gone, replaced by a solid wall of rough-hewn stone. I was deep underground, trapped in a part of the house that shouldn't exist, a place where no light could penetrate. Was this the way out, or a deeper part of the trap? It wasn't just the chill of the house that seeped into my bones. It was the cold dread of understanding. Empty. My grandmother's final testament, a warning or perhaps a lament for what was to come. My fingers trembled as I traced the faded ink. The words blurred, coalescing into a single, terrifying truth that I still struggled to grasp. Generations of my family bound by a pact. Not for power, as I had initially suspected, not for wealth, but for protection. From what? A shield, they called it. A sacrifice I now understood. I reread Martha's scrawled entry, her final frantic thoughts before whatever claimed her. She spoke of a vault beneath the earth, of the anchor's resting place, of the true ledger. My mind flashed back to the overgrown wilderness of the backyard, to the rusted hatch I'd stumbled upon weeks ago. half buried beneath a tangle of thorny bushes and invasive ivy. The fallout bunker discovered in backyard. Now it screamed. The air in the library grew heavy, thick with the scent of old paper and dust, and something else, a faint, metallic odor, like distant blood. The house itself seemed to breathe around me, a living entity complicit in the unfolding horror. I snatched my lantern from the mantel, its glass still warm from its last use, and hurried through the silent halls. Each floorboard creaked beneath my weight, a chorus of complaints. The moon, a skeletal sliver, offered little light through the grime-streaked windows. Outside, the night pressed in, a suffocating blanket. The wind, when it gusted, carried the faint, decaying scent of damp earth and something acrid like burnt sugar. Reaching the backyard, I wrestled with the overgrown vegetation. Thorny branches clawed at my clothes, leaving thin scratches on my hands. It groaned in protest as I heaved it open, revealing a narrow, crumbling concrete shaft. My flashlight beam cut through the absolute blackness, revealing a precarious ladder descending into the earth. The concrete walls were streaked with moisture, glistening in the weak light. The bunker swallowed the light, leaving only the focused beam of my lamp. At the bottom, a short, narrow corridor stretched ahead, ending in a heavy, reinforced door. It was made of thick steel, bolted shut, scarred with rust. This wasn't a shelter from nuclear war, it was a vault, a tomb. The room inside was small, circular, and utterly desolate. No furniture, no supplies. And in the center, resting on a pedestal carved from the same rough stone as the walls, was a single, leather-bound volume. It wasn't a journal like Martha's. This was older, heavier, its cover embossed with symbols I didn't recognize, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the lantern's glow. It was ancient. I opened it, the pages crumbling slightly at the edges, emitting a fine, coppery dust. The script was an archaic form of English, interspersed with those same unsettling symbols. It was a ledger indeed, a record. My eyes scanned the cramped, precise handwriting. A deal struck by an ancestor, a forebearer named Elias, seeking to save his family from the great undoing. A creeping dissolution of reality itself. A threat far older and more insidious than any I could have imagined. The Corail of Echoes, it was called here, not a name, but a description of its presence, its hunger. To appease it, to keep it from devouring everything, a sacrifice was required. Not a life, not blood, but a host. An anchor. Every few generations, a designated inheritor would be chosen. They would be drawn back to this house, to this place, to become the vessel, the conduit, the anchor. And then slowly, irrevocably, they would be consumed. Their memories, their very essence, fed to the Corail, becoming part of its endless, echoing song, a part of its twisted reality. My breath hitched. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sudden, nauseating lurch of understanding. It wasn't just haunting, it was preparation. Martha's empty wasn't just about the lineage ending. It was about what I would become. I was the inheritor. I was the chosen one. The book fell from my numb fingers, thudding softly on the concrete floor. The hum in the bunker intensified, a low thrum that resonated in my bones. It was a recognition, a welcome. What did it mean to be an anchor for something that fed on reality itself? The word empty clawed at the back of my throat, a phantom taste of ash. Martha's journal, a testament to generations of complicity, lay splayed on the library table. The truth, finally unearthed, settled over me like a shroud. I was next. The thought ignited a cold fury, a desperate resolve. I wouldn't be another echo. I wouldn't become a vessel for whatever ancient hunger pulsed beneath this decaying house. My breath hitched, sharp and shallow. The air in the library, already thick with dust and the scent of aged paper, suddenly felt heavy, pressing in on my chest. I pushed away from the table, the old oak groaning in protest, a sound that seemed to echo the deeper, more unsettling creaks from the floorboards above. This place was a trap, a living maw, and I had to get out. Now. I moved with an urgency that bordered on recklessness, my legs stiff, but my mind fixed on one singular purpose: escape. The front door felt miles away, each step down the long, shadowed hallway a gamble. The grandfather clock in the main hall seemed to tick with an unnatural slowness, each swing of its pendulum a deliberate, mocking beat against the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. They were trying to hold me, to distract me, but my focus was absolute. The heavy oak door, the one I had entered through what felt like an eternity ago, finally loomed before me. A gust of cool, damp air hit me as I pulled it open, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine. Freedom. It smelled like freedom. The sky was a bruised purple, the last vestiges of twilight clinging to the horizon. The trees, gnarled and ancient, stood sentinel around the property, their branches skeletal against the fading light. I didn't look back at the house, didn't dare to. My gaze was fixed on the distant iron gates, the only way out. I broke into a stumbling run, my muscles protesting with every jarred step. The gravel crunched underfoot, a frantic rhythm. The wind, which had been a gentle sigh moments before, picked up, swirling leaves and dust into miniature cyclones that seemed to dance just ahead of me, hurting me, not towards the gate but sideways, deeper into the overgrown yard. My chest burned, my lungs ached. I pushed through a curtain of thorny bushes, their branches snagging at my clothes, tearing at my skin. A sharp pain bloomed on my forearm, but I didn't stop. The gate, but the path was wrong. It was twisting, bending in ways it shouldn't. The gravel track had vanished, replaced by tangled weeds and uneven soil. Then I saw it. Tucked into a rise of overgrown earth, almost swallowed by a thicket of weeping willows, was a low, concrete structure. A heavy, rusted metal door set flush into the ground was barely visible beneath a tangle of ivy. The air around it felt dense, stagnant. I remembered my grandmother mentioning it once years ago, a dismissive comment about prepper nonsense. Now it felt like a beacon, a solid, tangible thing in a world that was rapidly losing its form. Maybe it offered a different exit. Maybe it was just shelter. Either way, it was a detour from this maddening, twisting path. I scrambled towards it, my boots sinking into the damp earth. The smell of damp concrete and something metallic like old pennies filled my nostrils. Blindness. My hands scraped along the rough concrete walls, searching for a light switch, anything. Nothing. The air was thick, stale, pressing in. I could feel dust motes dancing in the non-existent light, imagine them clinging to my clothes, filling my lungs. Not a voice, but a suggestion of sound, a vibration in the air that felt like it was inside my skull. It spoke of memories, of loss, of Martha, of my wife. The bunker was not safe. It was merely another room in the house, another extension of its insidious reach. This wasn't a refuge. It was a tomb. I fumbled for the door, my fingers scrabbling against the cold metal, desperate to find the latch, the handle. I finally found the latch, wrestled with it, and pushed. The door, which had been so heavy to open, now felt impossibly stuck, sealed. I threw my weight against it, again and again. The metal groaned but didn't budge. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the concrete floor, rising from the earth itself. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one that resonated in my bones, rattling my teeth, blurring my vision. The whisper intensified, growing into a cacophony of overlapping voices, all speaking my name, all laced with a sorrow that was not my own yet felt intimately tied to me. Then a sudden violent lurch. The floor tilted, throwing me against the wall. A sharp pain shot through my shoulder. The entire bunker seemed to shift, groaning like a dying beast. I was falling or being pulled. The next thing I knew, I was sprawled on the damp, thorny earth, gasping for air. My head throbbed. My shoulders screamed. Above me, the skeletal branches of the ancient trees reached like grasping claws towards the bruised sky. The bunker door was shut, sealed as if it had never been opened, as if I had never been inside. I had been pulled back, violently. My escape, a desperate, pathetic attempt. The air around me shimmered, distorting the outlines of the trees, the distant fence line. The gate, my escape, was gone, or perhaps it had never been there at all. Had I even truly left the property, or had the entity merely allowed me to play at freedom before yanking me back into its grasp? A profound, crushing weariness settled over me, heavier than any physical blow. My body ached, bruised and battered, but it was the spirit that felt truly broken. How could I fight something that could twist the very ground beneath my feet, that could reach beyond stone and metal, that could make the world itself a prison? The unfinished thought, I would fight, died in my throat, choked by the ash of what I'd learned. Martha's journal lay open, its brittle pages a map of my family's damnation. The truth, stark and unforgiving, had settled in the hollows of my bones. I was next. The Corial, the entity, whatever name it wore, wanted me. It wanted my mind, my memories, my very self to knit into its monstrous tapestry. A cold, furious resolve stiffened my spine, but underneath, a tremor started, a premonition of the unraveling. The library, once a sanctuary of quiet knowledge, now felt like a tomb. I could almost hear the rustle of invisible wings, the low, resonant hum of something vast and terrible drawing closer. My head ached, a deep throb behind my eyes, as if my skull were too small to contain the burgeoning horror within. I saw her sometimes, standing just beyond the flickering lamplight, her eyes vacant, her lips moving without sound. I knew it wasn't her. It was the Corial testing the boundaries, softening me. No, I rasped, the word a dry leaf in my mouth. My own voice sounded alien thin. I clutched the journal, its leather cover warm beneath my clammy fingers. Not just what it was, but how it worked, why it wanted me. Pages blurred beneath my frantic gaze. It was about becoming the host. It didn't simply possess, it absorbed. It devoured the mind, the personality, the very essence of the individual, leaving behind a shell, a puppet, animated by its own alien will. And it wasn't just one mind it consumed. It was a chorus, a chorial of echoes, each consumed ancestor adding their fractured memories, their twisted grief, their stolen reality to its ever-expanding consciousness. It fed on despair, on loss, on the emptiness left behind by death. My wife's death. My grief was a beacon, a feast. It wanted to anchor itself fully, to manifest more completely in this reality. And my fractured mind, my broken spirit, was the perfect vessel. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the hallway like old timber groaning under an unbearable weight. I flinched, my breath catching. The house was alive with its presence, a constant pressure against my sanity. It wanted me to give up, to surrender, to embrace the oblivion it offered as solace, but I wouldn't. Not after what I'd found. Buried deep within Martha's increasingly desperate entries, after pages detailing the horrific transformations of previous family members, after the lamentations and the pleas for release, a single, faded diagram emerged. Crude, almost childish in its execution, but precise. It depicted a symbol, a swirling vortex with a central point surrounded by concentric rings. My mind, reeling, snagged on a forgotten memory, a fleeting image from childhood. My grandmother, her face grim, pointing toward the far corner of the overgrown backyard. That, she'd said, is where we keep the things we don't want the world to hear. She'd meant the old fallout bunker discovered in backyard, a place built for survival, now a potential site for a desperate gambit. I stumbled out of the library, the journal clutched tight. Every step was a fight against the invisible currents that tried to pull me back, to hold me. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, or perhaps it was the house itself groaning, resisting my defiance. My hands shook, a tremor that ran through my entire body, but my focus sharpened. The bunker. It had to be the place. Finding the entrance to the fallout bunker discovered in backyard was easier than I expected. The overgrown foliage had done little to truly obscure the heavy, rusted metal hatch. It lay flush with the ground, a forgotten scar on the earth. I fumbled for the lantern I'd prepared, its beam cutting a weak swat through the inky blackness. The steps down were slick, uneven. I descended, each clanging footfall echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The air grew heavier, pressing in on me, a tangible weight. The walls were rough-hewn concrete, streaked with moisture, the ceiling low. I moved deeper, the beam of my lantern dancing over empty shelves, rusted tools, and something else, a small, worn wooden box tucked into a corner. The iron tier, the resonant bone. I knelt, my knees protesting on the cold floor, and reached for the box. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of decaying velvet, lay two objects, and a small, polished bone, impossibly smooth, etched with faint, indecipherable symbols. This was it, the countermeasure. A ritual, a sacrifice, something dangerous. Martha's last resort, and now mine. The chorale was a chorus of stolen minds, a symphony of twisted realities. Perhaps, then, a dissonance, a single, pure note, could disrupt its horrifying harmony. But what was the stillness of the earth? And what did it truly mean to offer a sacrifice against something that craved my very essence? The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, a sudden clarity that cut through the miasma of grief and dread. That, she'd said, my grandmother, her voice tight with a warning I hadn't understood then, is where we keep the things we don't want the world to hear. She'd meant the old fallout bunker, discovered in backyard, a forgotten structure, a half-buried secret from my childhood visits, now screaming for my attention. My determination, a fragile shield against the encroaching madness, solidified. I had to find it. The overgrown path to the back of the property, barely visible through the tangled thorns and grasping ivy, felt like a gauntlet. The air grew heavier with each step, the whispers of the house seeming to follow me, a chorus of faint, distorted sighs. I pushed through the damp foliage, my clothes snagging, my hands scratched. The scent of decaying leaves and wet earth was thick, almost suffocating. And then I saw it. A mound of earth, half swallowed by the encroaching wilderness, crowned with a rusted metal hatch. It was smaller than I remembered, or perhaps my memory had simply amplified its childhood mystery. The steel, thick with orange corrosion, groaned as I forced my fingers into the gap, pulling. My breath plumed in the dim light filtering from the hatch above, a ghostly exhalation. My grandmother, she must have been down here recently. The bunker was a single circular room, walls of rough concrete. Shelves lined one side, filled with dusty jars, canned goods, and bundles of yellowed newspapers. But it was the small, sturdy desk in the center that drew my eye. On it, a leather-bound journal lay open, pages filled with my grandmother's spidery, precise script. Beside it, nestled in a velvet-lined box, was a small, ornate silver locket tarnished with age. I picked up the journal, my fingers trembling. The pages felt ancient, brittle. It spoke of a focal point, a specific place in the house where the entity's influence was strongest, and an object, the locket, meant to be activated there. The ritual required a sacrifice, not of blood but of memory, a direct confrontation, a severing of the ties that bound my family to this thing. The instructions were stark, almost brutal in their simplicity. It was a gamble, a desperate final stand. The locket felt heavy in my palm, cool metal against my skin. It was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, ancient and unsettling. This was it. This was my fight. My gaze swept around the bunker, settling on a faded photograph tacked to the concrete wall. It was my grandmother, younger, standing beside a man I didn't know, their faces grim, haunted. A warning, perhaps, a testament to the cost. Clutching the journal and the locket, I ascended, the metallic tang of the bunker clinging to my clothes. The hatch clanged shut behind me, severing the last connection to that subterranean sanctuary. The house loomed ahead, a skeletal sentinel against the bruised sky. Inside, the air was still, heavy like a shroud. Each floorboard groaned under my weight, a protest. The staircase creaked, the banister felt slick with an unseen film. The house was holding its breath. As I reached the landing, a sudden gust of wind, though no window was open, slammed a distant door shut. A sharp crack like bone. The old grandfather clock in the hall began to chime, not the usual steady rhythm, but a frantic, discordant jumble of notes, each strike twisting into a guttural moan. I pushed open the master bedroom door. The room was unchanged, yet utterly different. The dresser mirror, usually reflecting the muted light, now showed a swirling vortex of indistinct colors like oil on water. The antique rug seemed to writhe, its patterns shifting, bleeding into one another. This was no longer just a house. It was a living, breathing maw. I moved to the center of the room, the locket clutched tight. My grandmother's journal lay open on the dusty bedside table, its instructions burned into my mind. I had to focus. I had to sever it. It was not a single voice, but a cacophony, 1,000 voices speaking at once, layered, echoing, pulling at the edges of my sanity. Fragments of conversation, snatches of songs, my wife's laughter, my own shouted words, all twisted, distorted, made grotesque. The room began to spin. The walls pulsed, the wallpaper peeling back to reveal not plaster but glistening, veined flesh. Memories vivid and raw assaulted me. My wife's face smiling, then contorted in fear. My grandmother's grim expression. My own face, younger, innocent, they flickered, bleeding into one another, dissolving the line between past and present. The locket grew warm in my hand, vibrating with an unseen energy. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the counter-ritual, on the instructions, on the singular goal of severing this parasitic connection. The chorale of echoes screamed, a chorus of agony and rage, as if sensing my intent. The air crackled, smelling of ozone and something burnt. When I opened my eyes, the room was gone. Was this its final assault, or had I already begun to break? The blast door, rusted solid to the earth, groaned like a dying beast as I wrenched it open. A plume of dank, cold air erupted, carrying the scent of wet soil, decay, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. My grandmother's words echoed, a phantom whisper in the chilly afternoon. That is where we keep the things we don't want the world to hear. She'd meant the old fallout bunker, discovered in the backyard. I knew it now, knew what waited inside. I descended into the maw. Each step on the concrete ladder sent a jarring vibration up my spine. The air grew heavier, pressing in, thick with a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a deliberate dampening, a refusal of noise. My flashlight beam cut a wavering path through the gloom, picking out walls streaked with ancient moisture, shelves laden with dust-shrouded cans, and the skeletal remains of what might have been furniture. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a vault, a prison built not for bodies but for echoes. The deeper I went, the colder it became, a biting chill that seeped into my bones, stealing the warmth from my chest. Then they grew, weaving themselves into a tapestry of unintelligible murmurs, overlapping and conflicting. They weren't words, not exactly, but the ghost of language, the memory of countless voices speaking at once. Trapped and desperate, the chorale of echoes, it was here. I reached the bottom, my boots landing with a dull thud on the packed dirt floor. The space opened into a single cavernous chamber. They pulsed faintly, a low, rhythmic thrumming I felt more in my teeth than heard, and in the center a pedestal. On it a single tarnished silver locket, my wife's locket. A wave of vertigo washed over me. It wasn't just sound, it was memory, grief, regret, all weaponized and aimed directly at the raw wound of my loss. My wife's face shimmered in the air before me, her smile, her laughter, her final, fading breath, all of it played out in a dizzying loop, each iteration sharper, more painful than the last. The air itself began to twist, the solid walls of the bunker rippling like reflections on disturbed water. This was its true form, a predator of perception, a devourer of the past. It didn't have claws, it had my memories. I stumbled forward, my legs heavy, each step a battle against an unseen current. The locket pulsed with a faint, sickly glow, drawing me closer. It was a beacon, a trap, a key. I knew suddenly with absolute clarity what I had to do. The pact wasn't just about offering a host, it was about offering a tether. My family hadn't been hosts, they had been keepers, sacrificing a part of themselves to bind the thing here, to mute its terrible song. The locket was the conduit, grief the fuel. No, I rasped, my voice thin against the overwhelming din. My hand trembled as I reached for the locket, the cool metal a shock against my skin. It wanted me to drown in it, to become one of its endless echoes. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the locket hard into my palm. My resolve hardened. This wasn't about forgetting her. It was about protecting her, protecting what remained of her in my heart from this parasitic thing. I had to sever the connection, cut off its supply. I had to make the sacrifice. I opened my eyes. I lifted the locket, holding it before me, not as a cherished keepsake, but as a weapon. And then, with a roar that tore my throat, I twisted it. The silver snapped with a horrifying crack. the chain tearing apart in my grip. A searing pain shot through my hand, then through my chest as if a part of my very soul was being ripped away. The images of my wife, the sounds of her voice, the warmth of her touch, they didn't vanish, but they receded, becoming distant, muted like a memory viewed through thick, frosted glass. They were no longer sharp, no longer immediate. They were safe but inaccessible. I had locked them away, not from myself, but from it. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and agony. The walls of the bunker convulsed, the root-like patterns thrashing as if alive. The pressure in the room intensified, threatening to crush me, to tear me limb from limb. But I stood firm, the broken locket clutched in my bleeding hand. I had taken its food. I had starved it. The chorale of echoes diminished, replaced by a low, frustrated growl, a promise of vengeance that seemed to vibrate from the very earth beneath my feet. The locket in my hand was inert, a piece of broken metal. My wife's face no longer haunted the air before me. He was gone, not from my mind, but from the entity's grasp. I stood there trembling, the echo of that terrible scream still ringing in my ears. I had paid the price. And what would I be now without the sharp edges of my memories to guide me? My grandmother's words echoed, a phantom whisper in the chilly aft. The echoes always find their way home, William, always. I stepped into the maw of the fallout bunker, discovered in backyard, a flashlight beam cutting a wobbly path through the absolute black. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the smell of mildewed concrete and something else, something cloying and ancient, like dust motes trapped in amber for a century. My breath hitched. The beam caught peeling paint on walls that seemed to sweat, then a series of crude, geometric symbols etched into the concrete. Not painted, carved deep. They twisted and interlocked, forming a pattern that made my eyes ache to follow, a visual cacophony of impossible angles. The space opened into a single, circular chamber. In the center, a pedestal of rough-hewn stone stood, barely taller than my waist. On it, a single object, a shallow obsidian bowl, its surface dull and pitted. It wasn't empty. It held a dark, viscous liquid that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, making it impossible to tell its depth or true color. It smelled like the metallic tang of old blood, amplified, mixed with something sweet and sickly, like spoiled fruit. A sound began then, a low hum that vibrated in my teeth, rising from the liquid in the bowl. It wasn't a single note, but a chorus of whispers, 1,000 faint voices speaking at once, too indistinct to understand, yet somehow familiar. My grandmother's voice was there, a thin, reedy thread. My wife's, a ghost of laughter, a sigh of comfort. They intertwined, weaving a tapestry of sound that pressed against my skull, threatening to unravel my thoughts. They're not gone, I realized with a sickening lurch. They are here, all of them. My hands trembled. This was it, the nexus, the source. My grandmother had left a journal, a cryptic, maddening guide to this very moment. I had to destroy it, break the pact. My fingers brushed against the rough stone of the pedestal. Join us, belong, never alone. My head throbbed. The air grew thick, pressing in, making it hard to breathe. I felt a dizzying pull, as if gravity itself were shifting, trying to draw me into the obsidian liquid. My vision blurred. They were echoes, yes, but they were also hungry. With a desperate surge of will, I reached for the bowl. My fingers brushed the cool, smooth obsidian. A searing pain shot through my arm up to my shoulder, then exploded behind my eyes. I cried out, a sound lost in the cacophony. I gripped it, intended to smash it, to shatter the vessel. It splashed onto my hand, burning not with heat, but with an intense internal frost. My own scream was lost, absorbed by the growing chorus of voices that now seemed to resonate within me. Abrupt, absolute. The hum stopped. I stood there, panting, clutching the obsidian bowl. The viscous liquid was still, reflecting my own wide, terrified eyes. My head swam. Had I done it? Had I broken the chain? I stumbled out of the fallout bunker, discovered in backyard, into the weak morning light. My body felt heavy, alien. The old manor house stood before me, still decaying, still formidable, but somehow different. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the neglected garden. I walked through the house, each floorboard groaning under my weight. It was just an old house again, just wood and plaster and dust. I should have felt relief, exhilaration. Instead, a deep, unsettling stillness had settled inside me, a quiet that felt more like an absence. I ran my hand along the banister, the wood smooth under my palm, but there was something else in them now, a depth, a flicker of something ancient and knowing that wasn't my own. Later, I sat in the library, the morning sun streaming through the grimy windows. My grandmother's journal lay open on the desk. I picked up a pen intending to write, to document, to process, but my hand paused. Not the cacophony of the bunker, not the desperate cries of the past, but a faint, singular hum, a resonance. "You are home, William." It was my voice, but not just my voice. It was all voices, a single, unified echo resounding from the vast, empty space where my own memories used to be. The house was quiet, yes. They had merely found a new chamber, a new choir, a new host. What was I now?